Welcome to the Kintsugi Heroes podcast, where we share inspirational stories of everyday people going through different challenges and how they overcome them. Please be aware that the story you're about to hear may have moments of deeply felt emotions and personal experiences. If anything you hear has a triggering effect, please reach out to someone who can help keep you safe. If you love this conversation, we'd love you to like and share it with your friends so we can continue to share more inspiration and hope to as many people as possible. Now, listen up for our next hero story. In this episode, I met with Melissa Churo. What a lovely person. On the outside, Melissa just looks and sounds like a normal person. On the outside, we appear successful mum, successful in career, and yet she was plagued with an upbringing and a life of hiding and trying to live with undiagnosed ADHD, which turned into alcoholism. And despite all the adversity, she used her courage and determination to find her path through and lives a very authentic life. She had turned that around to then help others. What this conversation showed me was that there are many people living with secrets. They have a different side to them that they don't bring out and show the world. And Melissa showed me, and has proven, how you can integrate those together and become whole again. And that was the most beautiful takeaway of this conversation. So enjoy this conversation with Melissa Churo. Well, here we are. It's another episode of Kintsugi Heroes, and I'm with Melissa Churo. Hello, Melissa, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you for coming to share your story. I'm always in awe of and humbled by the people that show up and who've chosen to share their stories, and it's just a beautiful thing. So thank you for being here. How about we get started, and I'm going to hand over to you. I'd love to know, hear your story. Why don't you take us back to where it begins? Give us some context, what was going on, and go from the start.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I guess I'm going to start off with a little preface to this, is that I have like massive imposter syndrome. And so even here, where I know you and your viewers or listeners just want to hear the truth, I think, well, my story is not good enough. I'm not adverse enough. I didn't experience enough pain or trauma to be inspirational. And so I just have all that going on in my head. So I just thought I'd get that out there. And I'm sure there's probably somebody out there who can relate a little bit.
You're not alone.
Usually imposterism shows up for me, in the context of like something professional, like, or, where I'm having to perform or compete or something like that. And I think, oh, they're going to find out I'm not really qualified or I'm not going to do anything. So it's funny, I guess, to show up to, a podcast in which we're talking about, overcoming adversity, and like, it wasn't adverse enough, like, so it's not enough. There wasn't enough pain, I should have had more pain. I should have had more adversity. So there it is. But yeah, for me, I mean, I don't know. I always feel like, and then I was born, like starting off there. But the truth is, I was born, like so many of us are, into families that, it's not all black and white, but it's not all great. I was born into a family with a lot of alcoholism. My father's side of the family is just riddled with it. In fact, I never met my paternal grandfather. So far as I know, I was told that he died drunk in a gutter somewhere. I mean, that's literally what I've been told. I have no idea if that's true or not. And that's a little bit of the backdrop. And, I, at a very young age, I still don't quite know when, can't quite get the story facts right from family members, but my parents got divorced. There was some domestic violence. And so my parents got divorced when I was very young. And I was, at some point, living with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, in Pennsylvania, which is far away from Michigan, which is where my father's family lived. But I also was removed from my mother, not because she had done anything wrong, but I think it was difficult for her to try to work, take care of my sister who was older, and then try to take care of me. I was very young. And she was a nurse and worked weird hours. And so I was instantly separated from my mother. And now, all these years later, I've done a lot of work around this. And, I understand why that happened, but I also now more fully understand the kind of impact that had on me, that I was left at a very young age, somewhere between the ages of 2 and 5, with, while they were family, it was not my mother, it was not my father. My sister got to be taken, in my mind, and I got left behind away from, my mother. And so that sort of started things off, probably not in the best way, where I internalized this feeling of being different from and apart from and somehow not included. And on top of it, and actually now I don't know if this was caused by some sort of childhood PTSD from that, or if I was born with ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. But that is part of my story, and part of the adversity is having those behaviors, and it looked really different as a girl, because from what I understand, most girls who exhibit ADD usually just have the ADD, not the H, not the hyperactivity, or at least it might show up differently. It might show up as daydreaminess or over attentiveness to the internal stimulation in the world. And I probably looked more like a boy. I was climbing walls and had tons of energy and couldn't sit still. So there's another thing that made me really different. I learned, and it was also, I'm 52, just had a birthday. I'm 52. And at the time, at least in this country, in the United States, they didn't even really recognize ADD. In fact, they called it minimal brain dysfunction, which sounds even worse than ADD, in my opinion. And they certainly didn't think girls had it, and they didn't know. So something was wrong with me, and they didn't really know. And so by the time I got to elementary school, and I remember kind of had this vague recollection of being really different from the other kids and not being able to sit still, and the teacher wanting to have me in a different class. And at the time, they would separate out kids who were behaviorally different for whatever reason. They'd group them together, whether that was because you had an intellectual disability, a learning disability, a developmental disability. They didn't care. They took you out of the regular classroom and put you into the quote unquote special classroom. And so this is what was being considered for me. And fortunately, my mother advocated for something different. But what I learned from that experience was that, in fact, it just confirmed I was different. I wasn't the right kind of girl. I was climbing trees. I shouldn't be climbing trees. I couldn't sit still. I should be sitting still. I was super creative. I shouldn't be that way. I played with, ants and roly-poly bugs. I shouldn't do that. And I needed to put up this mask and be somebody completely different. And God forbid I ever ask for any help from anybody.
How old were you when this first started? Like when you first became aware of this being different? And yeah.
I think it was probably in the first or second grade, which translates to about, what is that, like 6 years old, 7 years old. Add on top of it, my mother had me join school earlier than most kids. So I was a year younger than most kids. So I already was emotionally more immature, just developmentally appropriately more immature than the other kids in my grade. And that certainly didn't help. And she did that for pragmatic reasons, I believe, that there was no childcare, or she couldn't afford childcare, single parent, nurse. And so go to school. And I was very smart. I already read, I, had done all these things. It's just I learned differently, and I had a different nervous system than other people did. And they just didn't understand that. And so, yeah, I was very young. And I remember, oh gosh, so many times getting sent out into the hall because, I couldn't regulate the same way that other kids could regulate. Even though I tried desperately and I tried really hard, like I said, because I learned I had to put up this mask, and I don't think I was cognizant that that's what I was doing, but that's what I learned how to do. And this continued on. And, I sort of suffered through, I never got any educational help. I'm so grateful that that is different for kids now. I never asked for help. I never got it. I always felt like I had no idea what was happening. Luckily, I guess I was born with some understanding of things because I was able to sort of scrape by and even sometimes do well. And, every once in a while there would be an amazing teacher. Like I remember I was in an experimental class in the fourth grade with this wonderful teacher, and it was very different. It was like the first time, like school made sense to me and I enjoyed it. But it was this experimental classroom. So it only lasted 1 year. And then by the time I got to middle school or junior high school, it became increasingly difficult for me to try to mask it, and I felt like I needed something, and so I was living in Pennsylvania, and I started experimenting with drinking. So I had an older sister. Um, Still wasn't legal for her to be drinking either, but she was 18, I was 12, so she sort of introduced me to it, for the funny thing to do with your younger sister. And so I immediately was like, oh, this is good. And I remember one of the first times that I drank, intentionally. I certainly had different, like intentionally for the effect. And I had this plan, and I was going to go to the arcade. We had arcades back then. And I went to, the kitchen, and I grabbed whatever alcohol was there and I mixed it all together into a huge mug. And I thought, I'm going to drink this for the effect that's going to have. And it was god awful tasting. I choked it down and I was like, yes, this is it. I felt like what I imagined, what everybody else felt like normally. And went to the arcade, and suddenly, instead of being the awkward, my name's Melissa, but my nickname was Missy at the time. And I think my mother even called me Miscellaneous Missy. I would fall up the stairs, not down the stairs. I mean, I forget that character from the Peanuts, but it was the character who has like all the dust swirling around him. That's who I was. And so for the first time, I didn't feel that way. And I thought, well, this must be the answer. And then things started, life was sort of shaking out a little bit and kind of working out. And I did have a set of friends. And then my mother said, we're going to move 3,000 miles away. Sorry. I was devastated. This was in middle school. So like around the age of 12. So very, developmentally very challenging to move 3,000 miles away from any semblance of anything. And so we moved in the middle of the school year to a place called Mill Valley, California, which in the 80s, in the 60s, it had been sort of this like awesome place where Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead and, all these people were. And that's what my mother was attracted to. And so we moved there, but it was all by that point in the 80s, a very like wealthy place. We were very not wealthy. We lived in a tiny little apartment. My mother probably thought she was doing the right thing. And I was devastated. Everything that was I was sort of kind of getting a foothold. Yeah, I was experimenting with drinking, but I had a few friends. I played lacrosse, was sort of getting a foothold on life. And I felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath me. And, this is back before there was the internet. We didn't even you had to get special permission to call someone because it was a long distance phone call. It costs a lot of money. So I just was, absolutely devastated, and I rebelled. And I, moved to Mill Valley, California, and I started acting out like crazy. I would hitchhike for the sake of hitchhiking, just to go somewhere different with somebody. I would go to parties with older people and drink crazy. And this was not that unusual. It sounds like it was, but there were plenty of people who were doing just what I was doing. And, I remember, um, driving with people on Highway 1, which is this sketchy, very turny highway down to the beach, drunk. And that we didn't die is kind of a miracle. But this is how, life was. I engaged in all sorts of behavior that, I think anyone would have regrets about. And, did really dangerous things. And it was this combination of rebellion and, burgeoning alcoholism, ADD, untreated, everything untreated, and it just kept going on and on. At some point, it was a really cool thing at the time for people to get sober, like young kids to get sober. And I wasn't really interested in getting sober, but everybody was doing it, and there was a cute guy. So I did this for a little bit, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, right?
So what age were you around? Sorry, what?
About 14, 15.
Okay.
So, I mean, truly at the time, I had enough of an alcohol problem that, anyone clinically looking at me, had they known the truth, would have said, you ought to go to rehab.
How did you get it at that age? How did you get access to it?
Yeah. I mean, so Mill Valley, California was a really interesting place because as much as it was this crazy town where everybody, people's parents were never around, whether they were working or they were off traveling or playing music, it was a crazy, crazy place. But so we all kind of like, I mean, in some ways it was like Lord of the Flies. We were all just sort of like this like parentless people left to do our own crazy stuff. And so, but we also like kind of took care of each other. I remember, like I said, it was like somehow cool for people to get sober. And oh, I know what it was. I started dating a guy who was sober. He was older than me, and there was a very interesting like group, like a young person's group. And so he took me to like one of the dances or something. And I ended up, as I was doing crazy stuff, ended up being infatuated with a different guy, broke it off with that guy and started dating this guy. And, and we were all in this AA crew, this Alcoholics Anonymous crew, this 12-step crew. And we even got special privileges at school, like we could get each other out of class and that kind of thing if we were having issues. And it was kind of this magical time in so many ways to be, finally part of some sort of tribe. And that was amazing. And that lasted, let's see, that was from, I guess I was in about the 10th grade. And then my mother said, we're moving again. And so we moved from the San Francisco Bay Area down to Los Angeles. And the rug got pulled out from underneath me again. I tried for a little bit to stay sober, and I went to some meetings down there, but it just wasn't the same. And I think I was looking for a way out, and I found this gal who went to the AA meeting that I went to in Santa Monica, and she was like maybe a year or two older than me, and she just had her stuff together. She looked so confident, and she had this job in downtown LA. And I thought that was really impressive, right? You're like a high school student, and you also have this job in downtown LA. And I was like, that is so cool. And she's like, well, I can hook you up with this job, maybe get you a job. And I was like, this is amazing. I ended up going with her to this job, and it all sounded like amazing. It was this nonprofit organization, and we were like, our sole job was to give away books to schools all across the United States that would help kids get off of drugs and alcohol. And I was like, sign me up. And they hired me. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, who hires this, 15-year-old kid? I think at some point I turned 16 because I could drive. And, it was amazing. Well, it turns out there's a reason why they hired me. And that is because they were Scientologists. And so, so Scientology, for those who might not know, is, I'm just going to call it out. It's a cult. Some people would call it a religion, but I'm going to call it a cult. And the reason I call it a cult is because of how it behaves. You have to be 100% buy-in, or there's something wrong or bad with you, and they do everything to try to get your buy-in. And so this was an offshoot. This was a nonprofit run by the Church of Scientology. And so they started to reel me into the Church of Scientology. And I was still not drinking, but by that time I had met a guy at the actual job, the job I really got on my own, which was I was a bookkeeper for a boat hull scraper. So we lived near the marina, and he scraped barnacles off of boats, and he needed a bookkeeper. So that's what I did part-time. And that's probably all I was qualified to do. But then, so I had met this guy who was significantly older than me. And why my mother never said anything, I don't know. I was 16, he was 24. In this country, if you do anything physical, that's illegal. But here I was with this 24-year-old guy. I'm working for the Church of Scientology. I don't necessarily think of it that way, but that's what's happening. And I decide that my life has, I've arrived. I no longer need to be sober. I probably can just audit. There's a process in Scientology called auditing. And I was like, I could probably just audit my way out of this. I don't really have a problem with drinking. I'm just not in the proper place on the tone scale, or whatever they called it. So I ended up drinking with the 24-year-old, and I was off and running again, and ended up quitting the Scientology gig. And I guess because it was pre-internet days, it was very hard for them to track me down. But it was a crazy experience to be part of a cult. So, and you're probably wondering, like, when does the adversity end?
Sorry for the interruption. This is Ian Westmoreland, the founder of Kintsugi Heroes, and thank you for listening to this story from one of our amazing heroes. Our mission is for these stories to provide hope and inspiration to people experiencing life challenges, and to also educate the broader community on how best to provide support. If you would like to help us to continue to produce more hero stories and cover more adversity themes, we would welcome all donations. These can be made via our website, kintsugiheroes.com.au. The donate function is at the bottom of the homepage. We'd also welcome any feedback. You can email me direct using ian@kintsugiheroes.com.au. Now let's get back to the story.
And you're probably wondering, like, when does the adversity end? When does it end? I'm getting there.
No, it's enthralling. So are you still in the how long were you in the cult for?
Gosh, I mean, it had to be a good year.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I remember they did try calling me a bunch, and they were I think if they had could figure out where I had moved to, they probably would have found me. I know that they kept calling. I moved out at this time into more or less into my way too old for me boyfriend's apartment. And so even though I technically still lived with my mother, I was there all the time, and I don't think they could find me. But they continue. I think my mother said they continued to call for like years after I had stopped being part of that. Who knows? If I had stayed, maybe I'd be like famous, like Tom Cruise. I don't know.
Maybe. Did your mum know what was going on? Like, did she see it for what it was at the time, or did she just think
had no idea? My mother, had her own stuff going on, and she just was not available or present in that way. She was very, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, she just had her own things going on, and I don't think she had any idea. And I certainly didn't share with her that I was in the Church of Scientology. I don't know if she realized how old my boyfriend was. If she did, she probably should have done something about that. Interestingly, at that time, and I mean, I don't know why I had all these things that would just continue to happen with me, but I did manage to get a job as like, I think I lied and got a job at this guy who worked in Marina del Rey, which is sort of a nicer part of LA. And he was a venture capitalist. And turns out he was a total creep because he was something like 65. He had married a 40-year-old, which is fine, whatever. But then one day when I was working for him, and I was asking, I think I was like sort of trying to hint at maybe getting some more money. And he said, well, there's a way that you can get more money. And I was, oh, cool. What's that, Jack? And he said, well, you could sleep with me every Wednesday and I'll give you an extra whatever dollars. And I just started to laugh because I thought he was joking, and and of course he wasn't. And, somehow I continued to work there. And it's just like, I don't know and he had tried to convince me that this is just how women got ahead. And I didn't buy it. I certainly didn't sleep with him. And eventually, when the 24-year-old said, why don't we move to Hawaii? I said, sure. And we moved to Hawaii, and I guess I was like 17 by then. School was over for me. And I moved with this guy and the gal who had gotten me the Scientology job, who she was also out of the Scientology job. And we moved to Hawaii. So, and my mother let me, even though I was only 17, but I guess she saw the writing on the wall, you know. Um, and my life continued. And this guy ended up being abusive, both emotionally and physically. And so, at some point I had a little bit of clarity and decided to try to escape that situation and moved back to Northern California, where I had originally been from the original move. And my life was still super crazy. And that guy followed me. He followed me. And unbeknownst, I mean, like, I say unbeknownst to me, but I must have known. I mean, he moved in with me again. Like, I don't even know how it happened. And he ended up he was so awful. And I remember when I saw the writing on the wall, I'd come home and he was mad at me, and he had taken a crossword puzzle, and he had written the words bitch in every single, bitch, and a knife in the wall with the crossword puzzle. And I thought, I better leave. Something's going to happen. That's, worse than anything. He had hurt me before, but not terribly, and I always kind of thought I deserved it, And so being the different, untreated ADD, untreated alcoholic that I was. So thankfully I had a friend back from high school, and his family was amazing, and they took me in. And, life kind of just went on, and I sort of stumbled along, drinking and driving when I shouldn't be driving, and doing things I shouldn't be doing, and feeling shame, and, just really not having a lot of hope. Fast forward many years of that, like, it's just sad, in Alcoholics Anonymous, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think there's a story, is the founding member, Bill Wilson, who says, and then I drank like that for like 10 more years or something. And you're like, oh my God, how, how do you do this but that's what I feel like, is that's, what was my coping mechanism. And so many, many years later, I remembered when life just, I had, the thing is that amazing things will still happen. At that time, I still met my husband, who I'm still married to, 27 years later. And, amazing things will still happen. But, my internal life was just awful. And so, I somehow like made it, I don't even know how, like somehow stumbled through community college, and I ended up going to Berkeley. Like, it's crazy. Like, I had this crazy life, well, like this double life. And they do talk about that in AA, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that's very much how I felt all of the time, that, I was these two people, the person who had it together, and then this crazy person. And, at some point, because I had remembered my prior experience with AA, I was like, I have to get sober again. And I did. And so by that time, I had moved to Portland, Oregon, had started law school, which was just ridiculously difficult thing to do while drinking. Just, you know, I remember being as hungover as anybody could be, trying to ride my bicycle up what they called Cemetery Hill. So I had to ride my bike through the cemetery to get to school with like 50 pounds of law books on my back. And I thought, this just cannot be like the way life should be. So I got sober, or I hope what was the last time, in March of 2000. And when I was in my first year of law school, and I didn't even tell my husband. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to blow it. I didn't want anyone to have expectations. I didn't want, to show yet again that I couldn't, do this thing called life. So I didn't tell him, I think for like a month. And then I was like, oh, I got to tell him now. And then I didn't know how to tell him. So I didn't tell him for like 6 months. I mean, he knew clearly I was different and I wasn't drinking. And I finally did. And I started really working the program as they talk about during law school. But I still had this thing, and it was amazing, right? Like all of a sudden, it was like every window was open, every door was open, and the air was let in so many ways, just doing that. But I still had this thing called ADD, and I still was masking a really big part of myself and very much felt like an imposter and still wouldn't ask for help. Just I managed to make my way through law school, pass the bar exam, become a lawyer, but still always felt like that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde person. There was this lawyer person who seemingly had it together. And then there was this other person who, even though I wasn't drinking and I wasn't lying and I wasn't doing crazy things, I didn't think like other people. It took me longer to do things. I forgot things. I felt very different. And I didn't want to tell anyone. And I didn't want to ask for help. And the law, at least in this country, exacerbates that. The whole culture of law is that, people exploit your mistakes. That's what we're trained to do. Find where somebody else is wrong, exploit it, make sure they know. The judge knows, everybody knows. If it's a big case, it's in the paper. And so you really don't want to be saying that you're somehow weak or different. And I thought mistakenly that if I told people that, one, I was in recovery for, alcoholism, or two, that I had ADD and maybe thought a little bit differently than other people, that would be the end of it. I was certain of it. Absolutely certain. So I just continued to hide who I was. But the more I hid who I was, the more divided I felt and the more like separate. And I felt like I was living these separate lives. And at one point, my husband kind of called me on it and was like, I don't even know who you are. And it was really putting our marriage in a lot of difficulty. I don't think I was conscious of it, but I think it was putting my sobriety at risk. And it was like, I've got to either like integrate my life and be who I really am, or I don't know what's going to happen. And so, I mean, it really got to that tipping point. And I thought, well, and I was terrified, from the trauma of being a kid who was left, even for good reason, left behind, the kid who had to hide who she really was, the kid who drank and then had to hide what I had done, to the adult who had done the same thing, to the, adult who, and I just thought, I can't tell people who I am. My husband and I fortunately survived that. And I think I had to take this in stages. It wasn't like I had this epiphany of I have to be integrated and then I just did that overnight. It was probably, I'm thinking, a decade-long process where, and I mean, I was already like working the 12 steps. I was meditating. I had a spiritual practice. So it's not like I didn't have those things. But even with all of those things, I couldn't cross that line and let people know who I really was. And I'm not saying that people should shout from the rooftops, what their problems are, who they are, but there ought to be some authenticity, right? And it ought to be integrated in some way. And so the first stage was, integrate. And by that time, we'd had a child who was very young. I was like, I don't want to model this for my daughter. And I don't want to be this for me. And so the first stage was integrating who I really am in my home life, in my marriage, in my relationship with my daughter. And so starting to like actually tell the truth, not that I was lying, but like actually offer up, well, hey, I don't feel really good about that. Or gosh, I feel like insecure about this. Or, my brain doesn't work the same way. I don't know. And even just saying, I don't know was like one of the most empowering things I could do. Or I need help integrating, my sobriety and that life into my marriage, because I had just kept it separate. It was like, here's my marriage on the one side of things. And then here's what I do in AA. Here's my spiritual life. Here's my marriage. And it was like, no, and the marriage wasn't going to survive that. And so the first step was integrating, really letting my husband in. And thankfully he wanted, and he was really so supportive and so helpful and helping to integrate, and then integrating with my daughter. And then the next area that was probably the most challenging, and maybe still is work. So my professional life, and trying to like integrate, who I was. And it kind of came to same thing, like a tipping point where something had happened at work. I was sort of being called. I always felt like somebody was accusing me of lying, even though I wasn't. And, I have all this integrity now. And I just remember being baffled. And then what I finally understood is that people saw me really differently than what I saw myself as and how I thought I was being. And it turned out by having that mask and not letting people like really know who I was, not, again, like I said, I don't have to tell people I'm in recovery or I have ADD, but by putting that mask, I had this like edge to me, this really sharp edge. And so that's what would bump up against people, whether it was at home or in the workplace or out there in the world. It's this really, really sharp edge. So when things got kind of difficult at work with that, I was like, I know what this is. This is the ADD and, the ism and like not being who I really am. And so then came the work of integrating, myself at work. And I'm still a lawyer. I always find it interesting that I decided to go to law school while I was super crazy. And so I do kind of, there's a pin in that. But one of the things that I have done is I find it so empowering. And the first time I did it, it was crazy. But I was like, I am going to start telling people in the appropriate moments that I have ADD, and I'm not going to be ashamed about it. This just is what it is. And I'm actually going to find the strength and the empowerment in it. And same thing with my sobriety. It's a little bit easier because now, it's been almost 23 years of sobriety. And I think at the time that I was doing this, it was, 17, 18 years or something. And so, a little bit easier because there's a lot of time. But I was like, I'm not helping myself by keeping this part of myself separate. And all of these good intentions that I had, I was basically undermining them with these sharp edges of who I was without really telling you who I was. And then I also thought, if I want to, make an impact at all in this world, people need to know that you can be like a pretty decent human being in life, even though you've had a lot of crappy things happen. And even though you've done a lot of crappy things, and even though you're wired differently than other people, you can still have a full and amazing, loving, successful life. And I was like, well, if I hide that, like, what good is that doing? So I started telling people, both in my personal and my professional life, my truth, and just being who I was in the moment, admitting my insecurities when that seemed appropriate. And it was crazy because, I had previously thought like my whole world would fall apart. And instead, it turns out 99% of the people out there are supportive, maybe even impressed sometimes, which is always bizarre to me, but they are. If anything, that little bit of vulnerability, kind of like Brene Brown talks about, is, that's our in. That's how we connect with people. And that's the very thing that was missing my entire life, was the true connection with other people. I mean, I would get, bits of it, of course, but like that true deep connection with other human beings happens when we're vulnerable. And so now, I feel pretty integrated. I still practice law, as I said. I work for a government agency, and I went and got certified to be a mindfulness facilitator. And so I actually facilitate mindfulness on a monthly basis, practices with other lawyers and other people in my government. Is a very large government agency, and that is a trip. The first time I did that, I will fully admit I was so nervous, because it was like, I am showing up exactly who I am in every way. Because when I lead a meditation, I'm not the lawyer, confident, linear thinker. It's, I'm vulnerable, and I'm usually a little bit softer. I'm real. And so it's like, all these people are going to know this. And it was okay. In fact, it was beautiful. The first time I did it, it's like, I don't remember if I cried, but I know I have at some point, like in gratitude that I get to be like I get to do this. This is crazy. And I've led educational programs where lawyers are required to do, educational programs every year. And I've led hundreds of people through mindfulness practices, and have also co-presented on imposterism and like, what's that? And I tell people exactly my truth, whether they're law students or lawyers or judges. And, currently I recently became a certified coach, life coach, I guess. I call it self-development, but self-development coach. And I'm in a practice now of learning somatics, and I just love it. It's so amazing. And, my current theme for the next year, I just had my birthday, as I mentioned, and I was like, I don't have to wait till New Year's to come up with like my goal for the year. I'm going to do that now. And so my goal is, to integrate even more fully, this part of me that loves working with other people. I sort of have the side hustle, if you will, of doing podcasts and exploring mindfulness and purpose and all of this wonderful stuff. And then coaching people, who want to be coached, outside of the regular workday. And just so my goal for this year is sort of integrating how can I bring more of that part of myself into my day job. And what I realized was bringing some of my day job into, my extracurricular activities. And I was like, how could this be more fully integrated? So I guess that's my goal for the year, and sort of maybe my theme for my life. I don't know. It's how to be more integrated and to be fully in acceptance of each and every part of me. And that, I have seen through the years how what I would call darkness is really a light for somebody else. And by sharing that, that I can help, I might have a chance of helping them, but it for sure as heck helps me. By giving it away, I get to keep it.
Wow. My head's kind of spinning with everything that you've just shared. And there's just so much vulnerability, like you said, but so much power in that integration. And I'm sure there's, there could be hours of conversation and
Yeah.
peeling back around this. What a beautiful life mission, right? To be fully integrated, if one could actually achieve that. I've got a question about coming through that. So there's obviously that pivot point where you chose to be more integrated and show up more fully in all aspects of yourself. Did you have someone to help you, or to be a mentor or a guide?
Yeah, I would say that I had many, really. So in 12 step, it's fairly common practice to have what's called a sponsor. So that's basically a mentor, right? Somebody who has been through the 12 steps and maybe some adversity themselves. And so I have a sponsor. I am a sponsor. I have a sponsor, and it's this beautiful, relationship where I can really, and it just so happens she also is a lawyer. So that was helpful to have that commonality. And she really understood that. And interestingly, she went from being, a lawyer to a very different, like a different type of job as like a spiritual counselor, which makes so much sense. And, certainly, other people who are in the program have been there for me and I for them. But I mean, definitely did not do it alone. I have therapists, I have a coach, I have friends that, there's no way I could have done any of this without them and my family's support. I mean, people who don't even know they're your mentor are your mentor, if that makes any sense. Like, way back when I kind of skipped over one little part. I got sober for a second time. This is my third time. I kind of skipped over the second time when I was in the Bay Area and I had gotten sober for a couple of years. And I was introduced to meditation as a concept. And there's this beautiful place called Spirit Rock Meditation Center. It's kind of world renowned. And Jack Kornfield, who's very well known in that world, is one of the teachers there. I didn't know any of that. I just somebody was like, my sponsor at the time was like, we should go out to Spirit Rock Meditation Center. I was okay, So I go and blown away. And that was when I started meditating. And so I feel like I've had, meditation mentors since that time. That was, 25, 6, 7 years ago. I mean, I've met Jack Kornfield. I've talked to him, but I doubt he would have any idea who I am. But I consider him a mentor because, I went to Monday night Dharma talks and, still will listen to him, take classes from him online. There's a guy out of Toronto. Again, he has no idea who I am. Jeff Warren, he's an amazing meditation teacher. He's on the Calm app and he's got OCD, ADD, and a whole host of problems. So he's an amazing teacher for people like me. So these are people that they don't even know that they're my mentor, but they are. But definitely the ones that are close to me too. My sponsor who has guided me through the steps. And, she about 10 years ago started suggesting strongly that I go to Al-Anon, which is a different 12-step program. It's for people who have family and or friends who suffer from alcoholism. And to me, it's like black belt sobriety because it's all about relationships. And so I started doing that in the last several years and that, so she helps me with that as well. And certainly all of those people are tremendously, tremendously helpful.
It's so true that, well, from what I hear from all the conversations I have in my own life, you really can't go through life alone. And certainly coming out of adversity, it's, we need people to help us and we need mentors. We need people to, shine a light and hold the hand out and, create that space for us to come through, don't we?
Yeah. I think, if we come into this world sort of alone, I guess, but, we don't live in this world alone. And, it's the connection with others. That's why we're human, right? It's that connection with other people. And so that's how we're able to do what we do, whether that's coming through adversity or, being supported in something really amazing. We're all on the same team.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We're human. I love the way you wrap that up. I'm so grateful for this. I just looked at the clock. My gosh, that's gone fast. Melissa, thank you so much. One last question for you as we go to wrap up. If there's someone who's listening to this who can relate to any of what you've shared, especially the imposter syndrome, the ADHD, the mask wearing, the split lives, Jekyll and Hyde, I mean, anything, the alcoholism, if they're resonating, is there something you'd like to share with them now that might make their situation feel a little bit less challenging?
It's so hard because I know how real that narrative feels in the moment. And it seems trite to say oh, know that you're not alone and, look for the helpers and, look for the hand that is there. Because the truth is, it feels very lonely when you're in that space, and it does feel all encompassing. And I guess, maybe in hearing a story like this or like somebody else's, there might be that identification of like, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not in this by myself. And I would definitely encourage anyone who's feeling that way to reach out, to someone and just make, anyone that connection. And I can be that one. If you want to call me, if you want to email me, I'm here for you. Um, I really am. And, there are all sorts of groups that are out there. If one can, that if one doesn't connect with you, another one might. The truth is, we don't have to do this alone. And the more we do it with others, the more joy we have, the more hope we have, and the more connection we have.
Thank you, Melissa. So true. And I'm really humbled that you've made that offer to people to connect with you. That's really gracious and heartwarming. Thank you. Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much for sharing your story. And you said at the start, you don't know if you had enough pain. I think you've had a lifetime of pain in different respects. And thank you for getting to this point to share your story with me and our audience today.
Thank you. I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. And I know how many amazing stories, and I can't wait to hear them all. And, thank you for your presence and being, I don't know what people can see and what they can't see, but what I see is such an open and present human. And you made telling my story very easy. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. And you're very welcome. It's been a joy. Have a lovely day. And I look forward to connecting with you again. Thanks,
Yes,
Melissa.
thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Kintsugi Heroes. Please like and share the show to your friends so we can get this out to even more people. If you have a story you'd like to share with us, please reach out using the contact details below. And join us next week for our next hero's story. Until then, keep being you and remember that we are all heroes in our own unique way.